Welcome to episode 50 of the Career Discovery podcast, the show that's all about broadening career horizons, discovering professional potential, and empowering career journeys. This week, we're delighted to reintroduce you to Michael, the fantastic guest from episode 6. Michael is an architect who leads an architectural practice in the US that specialises in commercial and residential architecture. In this episode, we revisit the timeless and universal career insights that Michael shares with us. From work challenges and adaptability, industry dynamics and preparedness, personal growth and resilience. So whether you're contemplating a career in architecture or seeking inspiration for your professional journey, stay tuned because Michael's insights are sure to inspire and empower your journey. Enjoy the episode. All right, so we've heard about the loves and the joys of the work. What are the key challenges of the work?
I think the main key challenge is we are. It's a team effort to get a project from the sketchbook to standing in the new extension or new edition. And you cannot control the other team members' desire to complete their part of the task. And so the only thing I would say that is challenging in my current career is controlling the people that are on my side of the team, engineers, for example, that don't deliver what they're supposed to deliver on time, because they're part of my team, but I'm the quarterback. That's an American football euphemism, but I'm the one who's talking to the client. I'm the one who's saying, yes, we will have everything done November 1st. And then November 15th comes around, December 1st comes around, and they're asking where the drawings are. And I can only tell them that whoever my subcontractor is, my subconsultant is still working on them. I'm very sorry. So again, getting back to what I said earlier, I have to be really transparent to clients at the very beginning to say I can only control what I can control, which is myself, and to a couple other people in my realm. I can't control everyone. And at the same time, the permit reviewers, so the people who work for the local authority in your parlance, we submit the drawings and then they review them. There tends to be, just as you can imagine, if you can imagine, arbitrary, opaque, willy-nilly, pick your adjective, comments, timelines. And again, that's a little easier to explain. Everyone can kind of imagine that when I say I'm going to submit the drawings for the permit on December 1st. Well, December 1st is not a great, let's say February 1st. Nowadays, we think it's going to take 6 to 8 weeks to get a reply. 8 weeks comes around, there's nothing. What happened earlier this year for one municipality, one local authority I worked with, there was one discipline, the structural engineering review. They kept every time I emailed or called in, they had a different, more severe excuse: severe staff shortages, and it ended up taking months for something that I thought would take 3 or 4 weeks. So there is a little bit more understanding on the part of the client with regards to the time for approvals. But I would say those are the two most frustrating things because I cannot control them. It's a very difficult position because I cannot control them, but I have to answer to the client about them. And so I've tried different people on my team. I've made some trades. And unfortunately, this seems to be a very tricky situation in that I think everyone is extremely busy and it's difficult to get help. It's just up to me to be more on the next project, be even more conservative with what I promise to the client.
Yeah, I can imagine that's really frustrating. And like you say, I think the best way forward is communication and transparency. And as soon as you know something, sharing it. Because having been on, I guess, the receiving end of not architectural services, but when it goes quiet, that's when the client's worrying. They're thinking, my goodness, something's gone wrong. And sometimes a call or an email just to say, hey, look, no news is no news. It's not bad news. It's enough to just, give that client some comfort for a couple more weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I would say 99% of my interactions and my clients are completely fine and reasonable. I think given, and over the years, I can't remember, but maybe one or two, which really made life difficult for me. And I think I remember it's difficult to say, but sometimes you can say or think right away when someone calls you about if that person is going to be easy or difficult to work with, and it's the minutia in a way as well. It's how the initial email is framed, how they respond to, as I said, transparent and early. Sometimes someone will call and I say, I need to have your plat survey when we have our initial conversation, because right away I can say, this project is not going to be something that you can do without special permissions. And it's called a zoning variance in our country, which pushes the project 6 to 8 months. And there's no guarantee for success on that. And it's just a way for me to be like, I'm sorry, you can't, you can't do it. And I'm at to the point now where I'm like, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I would have said, you can pay me to try and fail. If you want, it's your money. But at this point, I'm less keen to do that. Partly because if someone wants to try to break the rules just because they want to break the rules, that doesn't necessarily, I don't necessarily feel like that's someone that I want to work with anyway. So it's sort of self-selecting, but certainly I feel very fortunate in our region. There tend to be, maybe it's because of the role that government plays in being the main employer or government adjacent. It tends to be people who are who even I don't know who maybe everyone, any profession can be mean, but let's pick on lawyers. I have high-powered lawyers who are clients, but Washington, D.C. is just not the type of place, not the type of region where people throw their money around or people throw their egos around. And I think it's just, it leads to an overall nice, reasonable attitude when a professional like me interfaces with them. And I feel fortunate for that. So I've never had any issues with clients, even though sometimes I think that in this type of professional service industry, that could be a complaint, but I don't have any issues with that.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's obviously working. Thank you.
I was the first class to graduate after 9/11. So 9/11 was 2001, and then there was a mini recession for about a year in our country. So when we graduated in May of that subsequent year, 2002, there were not a lot of jobs around. because everything kind of froze for a year. And when things freeze, no one wants to design, no one wants to pay an architect for an idea when they don't know what the future is going to look like. But our university had a career fair, and I didn't know where I wanted to go. I knew I wanted to work for that type of firm, but a professor told me that it would be important for me to have an architecture license, an architect's license, so that you can be an architect, even if you want to go into this kind of related, more of a macro field. And so I developed a relationship with a firm down in Florida called Merrill and Pastor. Scott Merrill is the principal for that firm. And the week after the career fair in March, the University of Notre Dame is in Indiana, which is right next to Lake Michigan, which is about 6 months of the year colder than anything that you have in Cambridge. And so at the end of March, they asked me to come to Florida to meet some of the other people, to visit the office, to see if I wanted to work there. So it's a very small firm. They only hire guys and girls from Notre Dame because they kind of know the mindset, they know the experience, they know we're able to communicate. And it was, 4 a.m, probably 1 or 2 degrees in Celsius. And I arrived to the beach, 6-7 hours later, and it was 72 and the sun was shining. And they were very smart and said, okay, this is the office. Now go back to your hotel, rest up, and we'll meet at my house for dinner at 6 p.m. or whatever. Someone will pick you up. And that was that. So I went to go work for them. It was an amazing experience because I learned how to be an architect from Scott and George, his partner. Again, that yin and yang of business person and artistic person. And at the same time, I learned about what I kind of wanted to do with my life in some ways. I lived in a little shack, a little rental house right next to the beach. I had a Vespa. Things were looking good, even though we were maybe 0.5% of the population was under the age of 60 because it was a small retirement town. But that was 3 years of my life that were extremely formative because I learned how to be an architect. I also learned what I liked about and the office environment, which you're very familiar with, the good and the bad. Almost all good in that sense because it was like a family in that they were extremely respectful and reasonable. And it really defined for me how I wanted my career to go and who I wanted to work for and with. That's the stereotype, like I said earlier, of a very hierarchical office where you, on the bottom end of the totem pole, have to put in 60, 70 hours a week. And you have no life otherwise. That was the opposite of what it was like to work there. You were not allowed to work overtime without permission. So the day would start at 8:30 and it would end at 5:30. And by 5:35, I was playing horseshoes with a beer in my hand with my friends next to the beach. And that struck me as really important from an early age that I thought, and I've been very, very, very fortunate. I cannot reiterate that enough, that I don't have to kill myself to be able to have the career that I want and sacrifice personal things like relationships or my own time or my own experiences to achieve what I want to achieve. So those 3 years were extremely formative to me because I realized I learned so much about being an architect because the idea persists, and it is true, that you spend 4 to 6 years in architecture school, but you learn what it means to be an architect like in the first 6 months of being out of architecture school. because it becomes real. And I was very fortunate that the experiences that I had at that firm, they just put us in all of these, all of the experiences that I have now that I described to you earlier: client meetings, job site meetings, designing something, taking a design and taking it forward. They put us in all of those situations from a very, very early age. And I only was inspired by that and excelled and wanted to meet those challenges head on. The strengths that I was given by my parents, by nurture and nature, were really going to be needed and required for me to be successful in my career, because there's a huge difference between sitting across the table from the wife of a billionaire who is your client, who is you're designing their third home on the beach, how you interact with that person, where you push, where you relent. That's a very, very different experience and environment from being on the job site with the superintendent and his team and his carpenters who are smoking cigarettes and talking about auto racing and are let's call it salt of the earth. Those experiences are extremely different. And those 3 years in Florida, because Florida is such a weird state, it's just that all that dissonance is just it's on the surface. It's not hidden in any way. Extremely informative in both the technical side of being an architect, as well as the more social and relationship side of being an architect.
Yeah, really, really, really important. And I think that, I remember getting some advice quite early on, having worked in roles with clients, that, this is not meant to sound inauthentic, but to some extent you do have to be somewhat of a chameleon, and you do have to flex and adapt to your audience. And I think that is a skill that you develop over time. And it sounds as though, you developed that really, it was a great place to develop that in Florida. So thinking about the career journey from student to where you are now, what was the biggest challenge along the way? So I'm thinking maybe a failure or a limiting belief you had to overcome, or just something that just didn't go according to plan that you had to overcome.
Well, I think architecture, being an architect, is so subject to outside forces that you have no control over, specifically economic interest. And so I remember when I was first starting out, it was because it was a recession year. That first year was slower, and then it obviously ramped up. I remember just thinking about that. You're just gonna have to ride the wave. Some years are going to be really good, and some years are just going to be awful. And so I think that is a difficult. That's a difficult. It can be a difficult weight, and I think it can be personality types. Some personality types might find that a real challenge. For better or worse, I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing. So, and also because I've had the experience of a catastrophic failure of the recession of 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
I have that in my mind, but I have that negative energy, those thoughts, those memories that I have, and I put them toward not letting me, not letting, not allowing my own career to be completely derailed from such an occurrence again. And so, for example, when I think about, let's say it was probably 6, 7 months ago already now, when things weren't, well, let's start with the pandemic. So, March 14th or whatever, when the world shut down, I had a ton of work. Like, I knew that I was going to have work for the next 3 months based on the contracts that I had. But I certainly had no idea what was going to happen. No one did beyond that. And so I couldn't do, I can't do anything about that. But 6 months ago, and as I said, I have been extremely fortunate with my career. My industry has been one that has been really I've done very well over the last 2.5 years, and I know that has not been the case for hundreds of millions of people, and I remember that, and I appreciate that. 6 months ago, or maybe less, when it seemed like things maybe were going to be going toward a recession, I thought about where my work was, what billings I had, what was coming in, what was going to happen. I remember thinking, like, late in spring, like, if I can sign these 2 or 3 things, I'll feel really good about the next year. And I'm also thinking about when these 5 to 10 projects get completed and those billings come in, I want to get leave aside a sizable chunk so that if the bottom falls out, I'll have some time. So in the back of my mind, I was thinking about these things tend to happen in the fall and in October. And so I've spent a good part of this year taking those memories of 2008, 2009, and that energy and putting it toward a positive thing, which is to try to protect myself if there were a dip, or God forbid, a recession or a depression, that I would be at least prepared as much as I can in my own way. I'm obviously not going to be obsessive about it. So I think that is something in my industry that is extremely important and can be a real something that's ever present, but never there until it is.
Yeah.
Something I think more personally for me, I think is when I'm too busy and I don't realize I'm too busy until 3 months later, and I realize I didn't check something that I always check, and I don't know why I didn't check it, like the obvious thing. So that's a real source of stress in that moment of that I try to avoid. So not getting so busy that I don't go through my mental checklist. I'm not a person who has checklists or spreadsheets or something. I tend to rely on my brain, which is not always the best thing because you forget to remember. So I would say more personally, I think that is the most challenging thing for my own workload and my own psyche. That's the thing is, architecture is all about the details. So, for example, the zoning code, which is the rules. I have a house on a lot. My zoning code is R65. I look up R65 in the zoning code, and it tells me where exactly I can build and where I cannot build. Those are the rules of building. That that on a project a couple years ago, I didn't check that before we went ahead with this edition. And it kind of backfired a few months later. It was all fine in the end. But that's the sort of thing, like I feel so fortunate in my career. And I have to remember three things at once. One, I'm really damn lucky. Two, the reason I've been successful is because I am always thoughtful, always trying to be, always thoughtful, always trying to remember every single detail. And three, I can't remember what the third one is, but my point is that if I always try to keep those things in mind, I'll avoid those situations because I guess what I'm saying is I'm successful because I've been successful, and I've been successful because I'm the one who's reading the zoning code, and I can tell you exactly what that says. And when I'm too busy, I forget that that's why I've been successful.
Yeah. You know, we all make mistakes, we all have failures, but it's if you can learn from those, it's all good.
On that last point, I think one of the things that is really important, and when we're working as a team on these projects, is that we are all going to make mistakes. And I am so fortunate that I work with people, developers, clients, contractors, engineers that have that mentality. We are all going to make a mistake. There's no point in rubbing someone's face in it if they're the one who made the mistake. The only way to do it is to go forward. Obviously, that assumes some acceptance of the mistake from the person, and I will be the first one to apologize and accept, because if we all have that mentality, and if we all accept our own mistakes and have grace for those who make mistakes as well, that it's just about, it leads to that joy that you talked about before of coming together to create something. It's great to create something beautiful by yourself, but it's even more special to create something with others.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What do you see as the future for this business?
Well, I hope that the future is more diverse. That's one of the main themes of these programs that I'm involved with, that I've been referring to with the eighth graders. When I was in university, I graduated with 40, and I think there were 23 girls and 17 boys. That was 20 years ago. Even now, there is not that representation with females, with women. There's not that representation in any sense with people of color. The impetus for the program, this New Heights program that I'm referring to, and others that are associated with it, which is run by the Institute for Classical Architecture and Art, which is a charity based in New York City, was some studies that came out, I think it was in 2014, 2015, that showed something like 17% or 14% of registered architects were women. And I think, I can't remember if it's only 300 at the time, 300 or 600 total female African-American architects in our country of 300 million people. And so that was the impetus to start this program, the charity that I work with. So obviously it's ever changing and ever evolving, and will certainly accelerate that in the next 10 to 20 years as the boomers who don't want to retire, and make more space for the later generations, which are more diverse, which are more in terms of men, women, and also people of color as well. That can only help our profession to be more responsive and be less homogeneous in the output itself. So that's my first hope for the future. That when I'm in London sitting in a meeting with Prince Charles or something, and I'm just focusing on the stuff, the content. So for me, it's this idea that I am extremely lucky to have the experiences that I've had, but at the same time, I'm never going to forget that feeling that I should be satisfied with where I am. I'm always ready to do the next biggest thing. And I think if someone is looking at this, whatever industry it is, whether it be architecture or law or medicine, and thinking, well, that guy's up there. I'm just down here because of X, Y, and Z. Like, it doesn't matter where that guy or girl, like, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you do the work and that you work hard and you're passionate and thoughtful and also you're nice. Like, I think that's an important aspect as well. So I think there is that certainly drives me, that there's an aspect that my parents taught me, like, why not me? And that, but at the same time, it was definitely something that I learned, and I purposefully, I kind of leaned into it. I lean into that. Like, if something like, a meeting with Prince Charles is an example of that. Like, he's asking me for my opinion, so I'm going to give my opinion. I'm not going to be like, oh, well, you're right, sir.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered the question.
Yeah, it's great. And I guess what I'm hearing is, don't be limited by the limits that society puts on us, or class puts on us, or gender puts on us, or race puts on us, or what the establishment puts on us. Just kind of, we've got to break down those boundaries. And that's what this podcast is all about. We want to showcase industries that might seem invisible or out of reach to young people and say, hey, look, here it is. If this is something you're interested in, go for it.
Exactly. Right. You said it in 30 seconds, much more efficiently than my 7 minutes. I just think that I have absolutely been right there where I look at someone and for a second I think, man, I wish I could be like that or something like that. And then 2 seconds later, I'm like, they're lucky for X, Y, and Z, and I'm lucky for a different X, Y, and Z, and we're just different, and our differences are okay. And I'm bringing something that's uniquely mine to this conversation or to this community, and it motivates me in a way as well, because my impatience leads to me not accepting that the way of the world is the way of the world, and so I always am inspired and inspired by aspects of when I was growing up, but also it's for me, I have to keep going at it. I have to. It's not something innate. It's not something inherent in me.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. Do you have a favourite quote or a favourite expression or something inspirational that keeps you going? Or is something you live by?
I think there's, yes, there's, the comedian late night host Conan O'Brien, right? You're aware of him in the UK.
I don't think I am. Others might be.
Oh, no. Conan O'Brien was a writer for Saturday Night Live, and then he was selected to become one of our late night presenters when he was really young, and he was doing it forever. And then he 10 or so years ago, he was put in this awkward, awful situation where he was given this big new presenter role, and then it was taken back. And so he had this sort of like existential moment wherein he basically he got a big payout to just not do anything because they wanted the old guy back. Listeners will know this story if you're American for sure. And one of the things he said in his last little monologue was that if you work hard, and I've already kind of said it actually, there's actually two things he has said that I think about a lot. The first is if you work hard and are nice to people, good things will happen to you. And I think that's what I tried to maintain. That's because that's the only you can only control. We can only control yourself, and you can only control what you know, how you're able to handle situations, and how you interact with people. So that's the first one. And then the second one was actually about kind of the team aspect. And he said that, I think it's him or maybe it's Stephen Colbert, who's another late night people. I guess I don't watch late night TV. I don't have TV, but these guys, Conan O'Brien does have a good podcast that I like to listen to. It was either Stephen Colbert or Conan O'Brien who said that heaven on earth is working together with others to create something. So in their instance, it's, for example, Conan O'Brien was the one who wrote on The Simpsons. He wrote the monorail episode, which is the most famous Simpsons episode. He was in the writer's room. That was his idea, but he and the others wrote that. So, their art is comedy, entertainment. And so I thought that was such an interesting way to put it. Heaven on earth is working together with others to create something beautiful. So I think those two things are about it for me.
Well, I love them both. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. Very inspirational. Okay, Michael, thank you so much for joining us on the show. This has been so fascinating. I've learned a ton, and all of the interesting stories and places you've been is so fascinating. So thank you so much. And is there anything you would want to leave the audience with? Final words of wisdom or words of encouragement?
I don't know. I feel like I've talked enough. I think, I think I'd reiterate that your life is not fixed, and it's your life, and just because something is happening currently doesn't mean it's going to happen for the rest of your life, and it's up to you to choose your own adventure. And each challenge, there will be challenges and failures, but those are learning moments, and all part of the journey. I think that's probably all. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much. All right. Thanks. Thank you so much for joining Michael and I today. We really hope you enjoyed these timeless career insights. If you gained any value out of today's episode, please help us spread the word by sharing it with a friend and subscribing wherever you enjoy your podcasts. It really does help us help you. And if you have any questions, comments or suggestions, do reach out. We'd love to hear from you. As you go about your week, take a moment to reflect on what we've learned from Michael. And if you're hungry for more insights, inspiration and empowerment, be sure to check out Michael's full episode and our rich back catalogue of other inspiring conversations. Thanks again for tuning in, and have a fantastic week, whatever you're doing.